USDA throwing a curveball at traders, projecting a new high for the U.S. corn yield this year. As the administration tightens its stance on nixing NAFTA, dairy leaders say failing to negotiate a new deal is not an option.
I don't think that's a result that U.S. agriculture is going to accept.
From boosting trade to finding a safety net that works, we cover the landscape of dairy in our Farm Journal report. And in John's world,
it's Veterans Day. No, thank you.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Chevy Silverado. High-strength steel for high-strength dependability.
Now for the market-related news, big crops not only get bigger, but USDA thinks corn yields exploded this year, now projecting that farmers have a new record corn yield on their hands. USDA doing what no one in the trade expected, raising the national corn yield a whopping 3.6 bushels from October. That puts the new yield at 175.4. Now that's 0.8 higher than last year's record yield of 174.6 and the largest increase from month to month since 1994. The agency raising production by 2% to 14.6 billion bushels. That's 4% lower than last year's 15.1 billion bushel crop. Now USDA did not touch the U.S. soybean yield, leaving it at 49.5 bushels per acre. That's down from last year, but based on more acres, USDA does expect overall production to be higher than last year. Soybean production forecast at 4.43 billion bushels. Well, with a much higher corn production estimate, USDA also boosted domestic corn ending stocks for 2017 to 18. It comes in at just under 2.5 billion bushels. Here's Purdue University's Chris Hurt.
And certainly a number of that magnitude really begins to limit upside rally potential simply because we have so much old crop stock, so much inventory that we're going to carry on into the 2018 crop at the end of the summer of 2018.
Now, U.S. soybean ending stocks for this marketing year was trimmed a bit, now sitting at 425 million bushels. Well, despite the damage from Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, USDA is still bullish on this year's cotton crop. The agency forecasting a 21.4 million bale crop this year. That's up 1% from October, but 25% above last year. With a yield of 900 pounds per acre, that's the highest yield on record. And as Irma took a big bite out of Florida's orange crop, USDA did adjust this year's all-orange forecast, trimming that number by 4%. USDA pegging the crop at 4.16 million tons. That's a 19% drop from last year. The agency didn't touch Texas or California's production numbers. Instead, reduced Florida's navel orange crop by 9%, which is 36% off last year. The president getting ready to wrap up a whirlwind trip through Asia, and while visiting China, he took a softer approach to trade with China, even took to Twitter saying the U.S. is to blame for the trade deficit. He said past administrations allowed for China to take advantage of the U.S. Well, the icing on the trip to Asia was the administration announcing upwards of $250 billion in business deals in China this week. Now, some of that is directly related to U.S. ag. The Chinese government agreed to increase soybean purchases from the U.S. It will sign a deal with the U.S. Soybean Export Council. China is also promising to buy more U.S. protein. JD.com, which is China's second largest online retailer, pledged to purchase $1.5 billion in beef and pork over the next 3 years. The pork would come from Smithfield Foods, which is owned by a Chinese conglomerate.
Today's signings are good examples of how we can productively build up our bilateral trade.
Well, while China pledges to buy more U.S. pork and beef, South Korea is aggressively buying. In its monthly tally of protein shipments, the U.S. Meat Export Federation says pork exports to South Korea surged 33% in volume in September.
Agriculture's national forecast is brought to you by Elevo seed treatment from Bayer.
All right, those are the headlines. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with weather. Mike, a pretty active weather pattern this week with more areas seeing snow. So what's on tap for next week?
That's right, Tyne, an active weather pattern this week, and that probably continues next week as well as we head toward Thanksgiving. Checking the drought monitor, well, it's getting drier. We're seeing some severe drought showing up, parts of Arkansas, southern Missouri, and a few surrounding areas. Going back 1 month, you can see that it was starting to turn dry there. It was also starting to turn dry farther north, but that got better. It started to turn dry in New England as well until that one big storm came in and wiped out any chance of drought. Basically, South Dakota, North Dakota into Montana has stayed relatively the same over the past month or so. We just can't get rid of the last part of that severe to extreme drought up there. Let's go day by day this week. Like Tyne said, an active weather pattern, stationary front in the southern plains. That will combine with this big system out west for a system coming through the middle of the country by Wednesday. We'll show you that in a second. Otherwise, it's just cold in the eastern portions of the country. There's a pretty potent storm out west with lots of mountain snow and obviously valley rains. By Wednesday then, that strong storm going through the upper Great Lakes, cold front down through the middle Mississippi Valley with some showers. This one won't be the big one for the week. The next one will. That's going to be producing a lot of rain or snow as it goes from the northwest into the Great Lakes by Friday. And this is very cold air behind it, even colder than what we've already seen this year. So that will be producing some decent snows through the upper portions of the lower 48. We'll talk more about the longer range forecast in our next half hour.
It seems like winter has arrived a little early. Thanks, Mike. Well, up next, we're off to Las Vegas for Farm Journal's Milk Business Conference. An oversupply is creating pressured prices in the milk industry. But could that change? Mike North, Brian Doherty, and Scott Brown join me next.
Farm Journal On Air is the go-to app for American agriculture. Ag Day, Agri-Talk, U.S. Farm Report, and more. 24/7 access to all of your favorite shows, TV and radio. In your hands, on demand. Farm Journal On Air. Download the app today.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Well, it's a real treat to be here in Las Vegas from Farm Journal's Milk Business Conference. And so what better topic than to talk about dairy prices and where we're heading. So I have a great panel lined up to do just that. Mike North, let's start with you. It's no secret that we have an oversupply situation when it comes to dairy prices. Do you see that situation budging as we head into 2018?
Really, the answer is, in short, no. The only way to really bring this inventory back into a more controllable level is to either export a whole lot more, or the hard part and the thing that nobody wants to hear, cut back on production. And end of day, we're not looking like we're moving in that direction. So, no.
Okay, so as we see the supply situation not really changing, you know, are we seeing exports slow down or pick up for dairy at this point?
Low prices cure low prices, so we'll see them pick up. But in the immediate, you've got an issue with too much powder available to the world and some dumping issues there. You've got butter on a steep decline, so the very short-term picture has a negative tone to it. You've also got an inverted futures market right now, which means the front month is closer, the closer month, the front month is higher in value than your deferred month. That's a reflection of your seasonal cheese demand, which has been the bright spot. So unfortunately, it's a supply issue, as Mike had indicated, and producers haven't been told yet by the market. Those market clearing forces haven't come in to say get rid of animals. We need some big changes somewhere, whether it's much higher beef prices, higher grain prices, higher demand, or all three.
The export market. Scott, you know, what are you seeing? We've seen the U.S. dollar index rise in value, not decrease, not something that we want to see when we look at the export picture. Is that impacting our dairy exports today?
Well, I think when you look at where we've been so far in 2017, we have seen some strength in U.S. exports. Moderate, I will say, but some strength. When you look at some of the current news we have out with global dairy trade today out that's lower in that index of about 5%, whole milk powder down, butter down, cheddar cheese down. All that worries me as we look ahead. You know, I remind us it is a supply situation in this country, but also a supply situation in the rest of the world. We're seeing some growing supplies in countries as well as pretty large stocks in places like the EU that need to be worked down before we can get higher prices.
He brought up a good point about growing supplies around the globe, really. And when you look at some of these key dairy producing areas, where do we need to see a production cut, and how likely is it that that's going to happen?
Well, Brian brought up the powder story, and I think it's important to talk about that. A number of weeks ago, we watched as the European Commission announced that they were looking towards a way to offload the 400,000 metric tons that they have in inventory right now before they start back up their intervention program next March. They also mentioned they may be looking at a market pricing system to move that instead of having to wait for a benchmark to get hit. They have a huge pile of powder. We have large inventories here. Canada engineered a Class 7 system that allows them to dump their powder onto the open market. The world is flush with powder, and that is kind of the staple good in the ingredient trade. And so as we talk about where prices are headed, that will likely be a weight everywhere, and the inventories aren't going to go away until we start backing cow numbers down.
Okay, so we keep talking about we need better demand. We keep talking about how we need to reduce supplies. But, you know, we've been talking about possible black swans event when you look at corn and things. What could it be? I mean, I know that's the thing about a black swan. You just don't know. But what could it be with this milk market?
I think the first step would be demand. If you look at China, and if we could make inroads there, and that's been talked about, but if we could bump that side of our export business upward, that would be one event that would be huge. China's annualized increase in export about 12% a year. So there is a market there. We need to capture that. So that's one. We saw that in 2014 when China came in and scooped up inventory. So that'd be one event. There would have to be something else, so if you want something immediate, some type of real weather issue in the southern hemisphere that drives grain prices or bean prices into the teens, something that all of a sudden says, look, we need to cut back on this herd.
You mentioned China. We saw some headway being made, some deals in the beef industry. So why can't we really break through that Chinese market and have them as a reliable customer year in and year out?
Well, I think we have that opportunity longer term, and I will say beef markets, we have years to get into that market. I think there's some real opportunities. I think when you look at those black swans in dairy, China certainly is the number one that we can talk about. You could see them getting seriously into dairy markets again, like they did in 2014, and that would pull us higher. Otherwise, it's really hard to find those markets that are actually large enough to make that kind of big lift that we need to get prices much higher.
All right, well, the supply situation here at home, we have good quality feed, and that's incentivizing some of these producers to produce more milk. So what about feed prices moving forward? We need to take a short break, but we'll talk about that when we come back on U.S. Farm Report. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Again, we're here from Farm Journal's Milk Business Conference in Las Vegas. Let's switch gears over to feed. You know, for those producers who haven't locked in feed prices more long term, you know, we continue to see these stagnant corn prices and look at some other things. Do you think now is the time to lock those feed prices in?
Well, I think as markets unfold, producers should be cognizant of where markets are at. The bottom line is markets always fluctuate. And so the last thing you want to do is get too comfortable and too relaxed with a price thinking that tomorrow it'll be just as good as today, because that's when things change. So as you look at opportunities in the market, yes, there are places here where people can be looking forward. There's a lot of carry in the market right now, so you don't want to be super aggressive, but at the same time, there are option strategies available to people to take advantage of where we're at and participate in better prices. That's the best way to manage this. You don't want to just get so comfortable that you back off and do nothing and find later that a drought, a change in policy, or something else has caused the markets to skyrocket, and now you're left buying higher price feed.
With corn prices, you know, we've had this old stock scenario that's just kind of been this wet blanket, and no matter if we do get a little bit of you know, some good news, it's kind of capped by the stock situation that we have. Has that changed? I mean, we look at a growing herd, we look at better feed usage. Has that changed that old stock scenario any?
Well, the numbers haven't changed. When you look at carry-in last year, about 2.3 billion bushels of corn, we're roughly at that number now. Roughly 40 million bushels of use a day, so we should have, in theory, used up all of last year's inventory by now. We're behind on harvest. The question that when we work with producers, we'll always ask is there appreciable downside potential for the corn market? Appreciable meaning something I really regret if I lock in feed now. My bias is we're at harvest, supplies are at their greatest, no. So book the feed, lock it in, get 3, 6, 9, 12 months worth of feed on the books because we don't think there's an appreciable downside there. Same thing with meal. When you look at corn, one of the big wet rags on corn has been the world carry-out number. The majority of corn is stored in China. We're seeing for the third year in a row now decrease in China carry-out. And as long as they have a big number on the books, it's not a problem. But my analogy, it's one of these situations where if you take a plank, very simplistic, and keep putting bricks on a plank where you have two pillars, it's not a problem to the last brick and then it breaks. What happens if the Northern Hemisphere or China or South America has weather issues? By the time you get enough information to make a good decision, the market will already have moved. So it's time to take action now, either book it or buy the call options as Mike indicated.
And we do have this growing herd. I mean, in all protein sectors. I mean, demand has been phenomenal, and that's really kept a balance with the supply situation.
It has. I will say that even if we grew much faster on the meat and dairy side, I think we still have ample supplies of corn for the foreseeable future to keep prices in check. I remind us on the weather side, don't forget alfalfa matters a lot here. It doesn't take much to get some dry weather next spring to get that portion of the feed ration to move up even more quickly than perhaps we see on the corn and meal side of things.
Real quick, even though we are looking at supply here at home, is the market already starting to have its eyes on South America?
Absolutely it is. I think that's the next big picture in terms of just where yields go in South America. It's the next mover we're going to really be paying attention to.
All right, we need to take a quick break, but then we'll have closing thoughts on U.S. Farm Report.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by the Liberty Link system, the simply better solution for a stronger yield and superior weed control from Bayer.
All right, time now for closing thoughts. Scott Brown, we'll start with you.
So I think cheap feed is going to make lower milk prices for 2018, another 75 cents lower.
I think producers need to keep a balanced approach. We're here talking outlook. Outlooks change. Things are always in a dynamic mode. Have a balanced marketing approach. Doing nothing is typically the most risky of all.
As you look at 2018, what is to prevent it from looking a lot like 2016, where the first part of the year started with prices with a 13 in front of it? Take action, be proactive, manage prices with a good plan.
All right, thank you all for being here and joining me in Las Vegas. We'll be back with more U.S. Farm Report in just a moment.
Receive a free trial of the Daily Grain Plan newsletter from Roach Ag Marketing. Text Roach to 31313. Start your subscription today by texting Roach to 31313.
Well, this Veterans Day weekend, John Phipps has a message about service. John?
November 11th was aptly chosen as a day to honor those who serve or have served in our armed forces. And it added more significance to what was previously called Armistice Day, when the guns finally went silent after the Great War, or World War I as we know it. These days, it has become a moment of intense patriotic fervor and a curious, well, to me anyway, new custom, thanking veterans for their service. I am a veteran, and it's not that I don't appreciate this well-meaning recognition, but in my case, it's a different story than most. I was part of that age group participating in the infamous draft lottery. My birthday yielded a draft number of 99, which ensured I would be drafted in 1970, so I enlisted in the Navy and ended up on a submarine for 4 years. My experience is not unlike many others, except for the fact that I was not just okay with this outcome, I was excited by it. In that senior year of chemical engineering, I had interviewed for entry-level jobs, I'd taken some plant trips, and I'd had several pretty good offers. But I was frankly looking for a little more excitement at that age than working with a slide rule in a chemical plant. I chose the Navy, believe it or not, because I thought the uniforms were cool, and I had never been out of sight of land in my life. Those years at sea did not disappoint. It was the hardest work I have ever done. The officers I worked with challenged me to keep up with them every day, and some remain close friends decades later. My 5 years that I supposedly sacrificed for my country were in truth years where much was given to me. The experience was a key part of making me who I am. I fully understand and support the recognition for service in our armed forces, but such attention can obscure the fact that for many of us, it was a powerful and positive experience. It almost became my chosen profession. Regardless, time spent in military service is not just a one-way transaction. I'm grateful I had the chance to serve.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all the veterans who tuned in this weekend. Still to come, as threats to walk away from NAFTA heat up, what's the likelihood that those threats turn into reality? I find out from Farm Journal's Milk Business Conference after the break as I sat down with 3 dairy leaders, including former Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack. We'll be right back.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast. From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this Veterans Day weekend. We have much more ahead. It's a dairy dilemma over NAFTA, but dairy leaders say one thing is certain: walking away from NAFTA is not an option. As farm budgets tighten, new numbers on a diminishing working capital on farms. And is it a farmer's right to repair equipment? That's this week's Customer Support. Now for the headlines. As eroding balance sheets continue to be a concern for farmers and ranchers, 3 years of declining net farm income is eating away at working capital, something showing up on the radar of the Federal Reserve. The Kansas City Federal Reserve's latest ag credit survey shows 82% of bankers reported a year-over-year decline in crop producers' working capital. Now, the drop was not as severe as 2016, but was higher than those bankers witnessed in 2014 and 2015. At the same time, the survey did show a glimmer of hope. The Kansas City Fed found while farm income continued to decline in the third quarter, it was at a slower rate. 52% of bankers reported farm income falling from last year. The Fed says that's the lowest share in 2 years. But author of the survey, Nathan Kaufman, says they're keeping an eye on that heading into 2018.
Profit margins are still pretty weak, and there are still some producers struggling in terms of maintaining a positive profit margin. So as we go into 2018, I think the focus will again be on what is the cash flow picture and how are people financing their operations for the next year.
The Kansas City Fed covers a wide geography: Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Wyoming, western Missouri, and even northern New Mexico. Kaufman says areas that are heavily reliant upon cattle are faring better than others. Well, the Purdue CME Ag Barometer shows a majority of farmers don't expect grain prices to improve in 2018. And because of those still anemic prices, a growing number of farmers plan to adjust their production practices next spring. Now, in the survey, about 20% expect to reduce their seeding rates, and about a third will adjust their hybrid trait packages. Those levels are comparable to responses a year ago. But when it comes to fertilizer, fewer farmers will make changes. Now, when it comes to farmland and rental rates, the survey shows 80% of the producers do not expect any improvement in 2018. But Minturn says when he asked non-farmers the same question, such as bankers, half of that group suggested that cash rents will likely decline in the new year.
Agriculture's national forecast is brought to you by Kawasaki and the new Mule Pro FXR side-by-side. Ride like a boss with high-end styling and rugged capability.
All right, that's it for the news. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with a longer range look at weather. Mike, drought improving in areas like the Northeast, but now the Mid-South seeing dryness creep in.
Yeah, that's right, Tyne. There are areas of concern, although I would say in the coming week we're going to see a lot of activity through the northern tier of states. Here's the jet stream as we head into the week. A light trough through the Great Lakes, big trough out west. And that's going to be producing some ripples coming eastward. You can see that first one coming eastward through the Great Lakes by the middle of the week with a lingering storm system off the northeast coast. Then this whole trough starts to move east, it looks like. Most computer models are showing this by Friday into next weekend. A blast of very cold air and lots of snow with that system across parts of the Great Lakes into the northeast. We'll have to watch that one, no doubt about it. Now, let's check out the 30-day outlook for temperatures. I'm going to go below normal for the Great Lakes down to about the Ohio River, northern plains northwest, from the Four Corner region through the Gulf Coast areas, above normal temperatures. Precipitation above normal, mid-Atlantic into the northeast. In the cold air, below normal for the northern plains and below normal in the southwestern portions of the country. Tyne?
Thanks, Mike. Well, as lead negotiators from Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. prepare for the 5th round of NAFTA 2.0 talks, just this week, negotiators announcing they are extending the talks by 2 days. That gives leaders more time to hash out a new deal. Well, the U.S. dairy industry is taking a hard stance, trying to break through current barriers when exporting milk to Canada. But in this Farm Journal report, 3 leaders, including former Ag Secretary Tom Vilsack, say walking away from a deal is not an option. Dairy farmers like Dean Strauss are getting good at producing milk.
Technology is at the forefront of agriculture. We just have to learn how to accept it and how to put it into the farm.
As farmers are grasping onto the latest technology, it's adding efficiency to an already growing milk supply. USDA's latest milk production report shows production per cow in September hit 1,851 pounds. That's the highest production per cow ever recorded. The growing supply is creating a glut of dairy, with leaders searching for a new home for all that milk.
Since 2003, nearly 50% of all the new milk that's been produced by our producers has had to go into the export market. And without that, we would have had a serious problem in dairy. So I think it's fair to say, while we are going to focus on domestic consumption and we're going to do our very level best, I think it's also fair to say that the chances are very good that we won't be able, just with domestic consumption alone, to be able to deal with the increased production.
While the dairy industry wants better market access to Canada, Mexico is the #1 customer of U.S. dairy, a market they not only want to preserve, but grow.
Mexico is our most important market. It's over $1 billion a year in sales. And if we didn't have access to that market, or we had to pay the higher duties that used to be charged pre-NAFTA, we wouldn't have the exports we have there. It'd be a serious harm to the U.S. dairy industry if we didn't have NAFTA and the access it provides us to Mexico.
Dairy may be a contentious issue within NAFTA, but dairy leaders say one thing is clear: failure to renegotiate NAFTA is not an option.
I don't think that's a result that U.S. agriculture is going to accept. And at the end of the day, I think there are a lot of other industries that feel very similar to this. I think the responsibility for the administration is to figure out creatively how to get the job done. They were right to raise the issue of modernizing and renegotiating NAFTA, but now they have to bring it home.
I think there's just too much here to walk away from. I think the administration knows that, but I'm optimistic we can get there, and I know the administration is getting the message. I know Capitol Hill is getting the message. And I'm optimistic we'll get something done here.
But as the current administration reworks current trade deals, Dykes says agriculture is missing out on opportunities to build new markets.
But as we look at the future and we look at the milk coming at us, and we look at the importance of export markets, we need to be looking at proactive free trade agreements with countries around the world, especially Asia Pacific. And presidents in Japan this week, Vietnam this week. There are places we need to be negotiating free trade agreements today.
Because if we're not, the EU is. Right. And one of the things we haven't discussed is the whole issue of geographic indications and the concern that we now have both in Mexico and Japan on this issue. It's another issue, is another reason why NAFTA has to get resolved very quickly, because it will also have an impact on the GI issue.
From trade to a farm bill, dairy leaders are also fighting for a better safety net for farmers.
The current program, the Margin Protection Program, as you know, is not working. It's not working as intended. It is the right outline of a program, but cuts that were made in the policy as it's working its way through the 2014 Farm Bill process really ended up rendering it ineffective.
When you look at the margin protection program that was passed in the 2014 Farm Bill, it hasn't paid very often. Producers will say it's a safety net that doesn't provide much help. And when you look at how they're signing up for that program today, they're signing up at very low levels, which means just not a very good safety net. So how do we reduce premiums or other ways to increase the likelihood of payments in low milk price periods?
But it's a battle that could end up coming down to cost.
Candidly, I said this when I was secretary, and I'll say it now that I'm not. We ought to talk about it in terms of not just a farm bill, it's a jobs bill, it's a research bill, it's an innovation bill, it's a conservation bill, it's a trade bill. And I think if we start talking about it in its totality, I think people will understand the necessity of finding creative solutions.
It's uncertainty about changes to policy and trade that weighs on an already pressured dairy market.
That's really what agriculture is about. Sometimes you have to live another day, and you be smart about it, be strategic, and then move forward.
And as producers remain hopeful, it's a grim outlook on prices that's creating a dire situation today, which could end up being a foundation to get policy ultimately pushed through Washington. Now, Vilsack also talked about using food as a convener in conversations about trade in the Farm Bill. He says if you can bring such a big issue all the way to the level of the consumer, he thinks it'll highlight the need even more. Well, when we come back, John Phipps.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by John Deere. Where can you find the most comprehensive inventory of John Deere certified pre-owned tractors, combines, and sprayers? MachineFinder.com. Sometimes the best new addition to your fleet isn't new.
Well, it's an issue that's showing up on the floor of state legislatures, and it's creating questions among viewers. Is it a farmer's right to repair equipment? Here's John Phipps.
David Bredhold in Louisville, Kentucky, sent this heads up from the IEEE. That's a professional technology organization regarding the debate over the right to repair. I seem to remember one of your shows that discussed this issue. See why we must fight for the right to repair our electronics below. You'll find John Deere mentioned. Indeed it is, David, and here is the pertinent paragraph in this article that I strongly recommend to all farmers. For example, as part of John Deere's 2016 end-user licensing agreement, the buyer agrees to give up all control over the electronics within the machine, including sensors, actuators, and computing units, as well as data, documentation, and diagnostics. What's more, the buyer is assumed to have agreed to the contract by simply switching on the machine. There is no discussion, no negotiation, no signature required. Just turn the key and you waive your right to own critical parts of the machine you just bought. The highlighting there is mine. Please read the whole thing yourself. Now, we've touched on this topic before, and you might recall I'm kind of lukewarm on the issue. However, for many farmers, especially those who live in more isolated parts of the country, I think this is becoming a growing problem. Not being able to even find out what error code 82 means, for example, is frustrating and potentially crippling to keeping machines operating during peak periods. Now, the obvious reply to these concerns is to not buy those machines, buy another brand. And I suspect there is a brisk demand for gray market tools like diagnostic software and hardware as more manufacturers adopt these policies. Already, there are YouTube videos on all kinds of repairs and third-party parts retailers to supply do-it-yourself owners. If you remember, that's how I fixed my clothes dryer. Nonetheless, there are right-to-repair laws working in their way through several state legislatures. I'm still not sure how urgent this problem is, but I'm becoming more convinced that such technology ownership issues usually get solved by being leapfrogged by newer technology. Legal or legislative solutions tend to be obsolete upon arrival, and we should not rule out another manufacturer choosing to make repair easier as kind of a marketing edge. Regardless, I'll keep a closer eye on this debate in the future.
Thanks, John. And remember, if you have questions or comments for John, email him at mailbag@usfarmreport.com. When we come back, we head out west to talk to Baxter Black.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by the Enlist Weed Control System. More weed control, less drift and volatility, maximum yield potential.
Welcome back. Well, we already made a trip to Vegas this weekend, but now let's head a little farther southwest and check in with Baxter Black.
Everywhere I go, 10% of the people do 90% of the work, and they get to do it for nothing. And that's not the only perk. They're asked to donate to causes, contribute their cash and their time, to get up early, usually stay late, and always claim they don't mind. They serve on boards and commissions, participate in the potluck, bring snacks for the kindergartners. For hay rides, they furnish the truck. They take their turn on the fair board as deacons or soccer moms, jury duty or Salvation Army, ringing bells and gathering alms. They raise funds for endless projects. The food bank, the FFA, missions in faraway countries, Girl Scouts and the PTA. They call on the shut-ins, fight cancer, or maybe teach others to read. Through Rotary, Lions, or Kiwanis, they work to fulfill a need. The 10% you can count on to sign up, to help and belong. Always ready and willing, they make our community strong. Well, they often don't get the glory or noticed by everyone, but they're easy to find at a party, cleaning up, after it's done. Well, what causes man to serve his fellow man? At best, I discern not money, because sometimes the thanks is all they'll earn. And it can't be evolution where only the toughest survive, or lessons learned in a classroom. Compassion, see page 25. But it's there in certain people. Giving satisfies their needs. And you can't find it in a brain scan, but you can see it in their deeds. No physical exam can spot it, and it won't show up on the chart. But if I had to guess what it is, I'd say it comes from the heart. So I'll just admit that we're lucky the 10% are right here, because without them, nothing would happen. And they do it all volunteer. Vol from the Greek meaning work like a horse, and untier meaning without pay. Can I sign you up? This is Baxter Black from out there.
Thanks, Baxter. To hear more from Baxter, just visit him online at baxterblack.com. When we come back, Tractor Tales and our Country Church Salute, so don't go anywhere.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Kubota. Check out Kubota's RTVX 1140, a rugged utility vehicle with seating for 4. Tractor Tales is brought to you by John Deere. Where can you find the most comprehensive inventory of John Deere certified pre-owned tractors, combines, and sprayers? MachineFinder.com. Sometimes the best new addition to your fleet isn't new.
Welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week we're going to head to north central Illinois to check out a classic International 504. Owner Eugene Van Devoorde tells us he ordered this beauty from an antique tractor magazine. All he knows is that it farmed in Alabama most of its life.
I'm not sure where it came from. The last word I got from the guy I bought it from, I bought it out of Antique Tractor magazine from a tractor scalper, and he said it came from Alabama. So I don't know what it did in Alabama. I don't know who owned it. I don't know anything more about it than that. But when I got it, the torque amplifier was out, and it would run, but I did several other adjustments to it and did some other things. I had the rear end apart, took it over, take a look at it, put new tires on the front and tires on the back. I think they're still original, at least when I bought it. As far as that goes, the motor runs fine now. Had to do a little tune-up on the motor, and other than that, why the torque amplifier was a simple matter. It's not a big deal as far as I'm concerned, but I got it all going. The radiator was bad. I had to take the radiator out and clean it up. I like the tractor simply to go on tractor drives with. It's very economical. I can run 2 days and still have fuel in the tank. It drives nice. You're sitting high, and you're not in the dust or anything if you're on gravel roads. And I am getting older, and I am getting lazier, or whatever you want to call it. I wanted an easier way to get up on it, so I went to the scrap pile and I found some scrap, and the aluminum steps, I don't know where they came from. They were laying in the scrap pile, so I said, heck, I'll just use them. I don't know who they belong to, but they're mine now, so that's all that counts. Really easy to get up on and off of now. Steers good, got power steering, it's got 3-point hitch, it's got torque amplifier, it's got live PTO, it's got all the toys. What's the main thing, you know, that's what you want when you start buying antique stuff, you get all the toys. Just a neat, nice little tractor, and it doesn't weigh much. You can put it on a trailer and go down the road with a pickup, and away you go.
Thanks so much. Well, the Country Church Salute this week is located in Fallon, Nevada. The church actually had an attic fire many years ago, so services had been held in the fellowship hall. However, the congregation worked to remodel the top of the church and rebuild it. Thanks for sending that in. If you have a home church that you would like to submit, you could do that to the address on the screen. Stay with us. We have some From the Farm photos next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by QLF. For 40 years, QLF has been proud to support American farmers that feed the world.
Welcome back. Well, Mike, I emceed a conference, our Farm Journal's Milk Business Conference in Las Vegas this week. And I was quickly reminded when I returned to northern Indiana that winter's coming.
Yes, it is. It's turning colder.
Well, I saw some snow photos again this week, but Mike, not going to focus on those just yet. Stephanie Shocker is in Big Rock, Iowa. She says Grandpa had a co-pilot this week. His 9.5-month-old grandson kept him company while harvesting. And this late in harvest, I understand. You need all the company you can get.
That's right. And there's nothing like a fall sunset especially when finishing up harvest. Josh Munkoff captured these gorgeous photos as he said harvest was coming to an end under the sun in the Missouri river bottoms. He said yields were really all over the board as the sporadic rainfall really took a toll on this year's crop, but overall yields ended up being about average.
All right, if you have any pictures or videos you would like to send in, you can do that to the address on the screen.
And from all of us at U.S. Farm Report, I'm Mike Hoffman.
And I'm Tyne Morgan. Thank you for watching us this Veterans Day weekend. Be sure to join us again right here next week as we work to build on our tradition. And to all those veterans out there, thank you.
U.S. Farm Report has been brought to you by Ram Commercial, America's longest-lasting heavy-duty pickups. U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.